Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR and Sirius XM Channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. This is primary election day for the state of Maryland. All congressional districts are in play across the state, but the biggest and arguably most important race is the U.S. Senate race. Prince George's County Executive Angela Alsobrooks versus Congressman David Trone for the Democratic primary. Waiting for either of them is former Republican Governor Larry Hogan and the general election in November. Those issues and much more as we dissect Maryland's primary election. My guests are Dr. Sharice Nelson, political analyst, William Ford, reporter with Maryland Matters, and Republican analyst Raynard Jackson. Gang, thank you so much for joining the conversation.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
So, Sharice, I'll start with you with, the obvious, even as we are still waiting for the results in about an hour or two or three, depending on how the counting goes tonight. We know that sometimes these things can happen immediately, and then sometimes it can take all night. From your perspective, what is the most important issue regarding this primary and why?
Well, the most important issue is personality. Because if you look at the two candidates as far as their platforms are concerned, they're very similar. They're not too many differences when we come and we're talking about what they're after. And so it's really about personality and values, right? We're looking at Trone, who is a businessman primarily. When we're looking at Alsobrook, we're looking at someone that is far more of a civil servant who has spent her career being a civil servant, whereas Trone has been a businessman. So when we're looking at the issues or we're putting this up before us, the biggest thing is personality. And what we know from history's perspective is that there have been a limited number of Black people in the United States Senate, right? So for this Black woman to win this primary with the possibility of going on to win an election in a blue state like Maryland, it'll mean something huge historically. But what it boils down to is personality.
Would you agree with that, Renard?
Well, yeah, Maryland is an interesting kind of political environment to play in. I think if also Brooks were to win it, which I think she's going to get blown away tonight for all kind of reasons, and we can get into that when you want. I think if she were to be the Democratic nominee, Larry Hogan, the former Republican governor, wins by a landslide. David Trone, which is what I anticipate, then I think it'll be a more competitive race, but I think it's Larry Hogan's race to lose. And the reason I am not high on Alsobrook is because what I find amazing is if you become county executive of PG County, obviously you have statewide ambition. That's a given. But where I fought her is when she became county executive and knew she wanted to run statewide at some point. I don't think she did a good enough job increasing her or expanding her base. Black folks got her in, but when you get outside of PG County and Baltimore, then you get into white and rural parts of the state. And I think she did a horrible job cultivating those relationships over the past few years.
Mm-hmm. What say you, William?
Well, when you are looking at the dynamic here, I think Dr. Nels makes a great point. The personalities have been shining through, that one televised debate got to allow voters to see who they are, what they believe in, how they believe in it. What will they do with their platforms? I mean, they talked about healthcare reform, a women's right to choose. Criminal justice reform is a little different because Congressman Trone has always been against the death penalty. But County Executive Alsobrooks made it clear when voters in Maryland approve to not use the death penalty as a means for deterring crime, she was very open about saying when it comes to children, the biggest thing she would want to do is to put the highest penalty, because when you harm children, you are harming society at large. Now, There was the Emerson poll that came out recently, and that showed. Now you can believe a poll if you want, but the poll was the poll, and it did show it. And I've gone to some polling places. County executive has many of those lime green signature T-shirts at those polls. Period. Now I've talked to several voters. The majority of them have sided with the county executive, but as Mr. Jackson stated, and matter of fact, Congressman Trone has mentioned it, and a few voters also said, can she get those individuals from rural counties, Western Maryland, that Trone has jumped on to say, I'm the guy that can do it?
Yeah. Now, and to that point, if you look at the political advertisements that are produced by either campaign or by those entities supporting either campaign. I'm not talking about the attack ads now, but I'm just talking about those political ads that try to lift up some of the issues that both of these candidates are supporting. They sound so much like each other. They are both of them talk about holding the Senate, okay, keeping both Maryland Senate seats Democratic. They talk about whether they make reference to a woman's right to choose, or they talk about women's access to reproductive health care. Different words, same thing. So, Sharice, for those people who have not been paying attention, and I'm going to get into that a little bit more, I even spoke to a lady earlier today. I asked her in Baltimore today, who did she vote for U.S. Senate? And she paused and she said she did not even remember voting for someone for U.S. Senate. And then she thought about it and she said, yeah, I just didn't know enough about the candidates. How is that possible? Are the Sharices and the Williams and the Renards and the Harolds, are we out of touch with the way people are really paying attention?
I think that we discount how volatile the political landscape has become across the country. And I think that when you don't have an exciting figure that is at the helm of the party, you get lots of apathy. I also think that we are in a political environment where there is the political ignorant, right? I think that we discount I think that we discount the amount of airtime we've given Trump has made people that are disinterested in Trump, in Biden, in Republican, in Democrat. We have tuned them out so much. I mean, we have turned them off so much that they have tuned out. So I don't think it's the idea. I think it's the idea of issues don't matter, which is why I led when you asked me the question on what's the most important thing here. It is personality. It is personality. It is name recognition. Do we want a white man who essentially bankrolled his own campaign to be our nominee, or do we want a black woman who decided to raise her hand for a very difficult job by being the executor in Prince George's County, a county that has essentially become the 10th ward or 9th ward or whatever ward you want to call it of DC, a black woman who raised her hand and said, I want to take on this very difficult job. Do we choose her, or do we choose a man who has bankrolled his own campaign? That's, to me, what it comes down to. People are apathetic. They're not paying attention. And in their minds, the real election doesn't start until November anyhow.
Now, you know that Angela also Brooks would take exception to the 9th Ward comment. you know she would.
No, of course they would, and rightfully so. I'm talking about the mainstream of how folks see it, right? I would take large exception to the Ninth Ward comment as well. And the reason I would take exception to the Ninth Ward comment is when I did live in the area, Prince George's, for all intents and purposes, is the economic engine in many ways that's feeding the state, right? So if I were in Prince George's County, I would be very, if I lived there, I would then be very upset about that characterization as well, because they are a huge economic engine for the entire state. So to say that I'm a part of another municipality when I'm driving the economics in the state of Maryland, of course, is disheartening and should be.
So, Reynard, and I'm sure all of you have heard this, but there's this saying, and I've been hearing this since I was paying attention to this kind of thing, even as a child. And that is, as Prince George's and Baltimore go, so goes the state. Now, obviously, Montgomery County remains in play, because we are talking about Montgomery County being the most heavily populated, most populous county in the state, and then you have Baltimore and Prince George's and Baltimore, respectively. So, do you believe that is still the case, Reynard? Prince George's and Baltimore could determine this race? Also, Brooks and David Trone have spent a lot of time in Baltimore.
Yeah, I think what it's going to come down to tonight is, with Trone, how much can he shrink the margin of defeat in Prince George's County? I don't think he will win the county, but if also Brooke doesn't run away with it, because he's going to run up the numbers in Montgomery County. There's no question about that. That's his natural base of support. And then when you get further out into the rural parts of Maryland, I think he runs that up too. And let's talk about the issue that polite people don't talk about in polite company. Also, Brooke is a Black woman. That, once you get out of the metropolis areas, that's something that those good old boys in Western Maryland talk about amongst themselves. And again, it goes back to my earlier comment that when she became county executive, to me, I would have spent a lot of time in the western part of the state just cultivating relationship, doing the chicken circuit, speaking invitations and all that stuff, without losing her base, because she had to make sure the county was taken care of. But she should have been doing that for 3-4 years in advance, because again, anyone that becomes county executive in Prince George's County has higher aspirations by default.
Real quick, William, what's wrong with financing your own campaign if you have the money?
Well, I was getting ready to go into that. Delegate Tiffany Alston, she represents Prince George's, and she is a David Trone supporter. She went and said to those who say David Trone's doing that, she called it, quote, disgusting. And she said there's nothing illegal about it. If Congressman Trone and anybody else wants to finance their own campaign, so be it. Here's the opposite side to that argument, though. Didn't Donald Trump say the same thing? Didn't other rich individuals say the same thing? When they use their money, they feel they can just spread their message and say whatever he or she wants. And there's been gaffes that Congressman Trone has made.
Yeah.
And that has been on his own merit. And no one else did it. He did.
I do want to talk about some of those gaffes before or after I take this break. But beforehand, real quick, Reynard, you have an event that you want to share with us real quick during these last 30 seconds.
Yeah, quickly, my group of Black Americans for a Better Future, which is a super PAC, we're hosting a major economic summit of the top Black, Asian, Hispanic, and Indian entrepreneurs with the theme of a vision for economic opportunity and empowerment in the 21st century. So we have a couple of my billionaire friends, Ken Langone, the co-founder of Home Depot, Scott Bessent, one of the top hedge fund managers in the country, We got a couple of retired NBA players, Royce Wright, a couple of Grammy Award-winning songwriter producers, Carvin Hagen and Benny Pugh, and a lot of terrific, successful entrepreneurs. And these businessmen, billionaires, they want to know what they can do by virtue of their Rolodex and their network of folks to help minority entrepreneurs grow their businesses. And so this is a one-of-a-kind event in DC, and pulling all these guys together in one room, we're looking forward to it.
Where and when?
Yeah, it's May 22nd, which is a week from tomorrow, Wednesday, at the Hilton, Washington, D.C., Capitol Hill. On the Senate side was the old Washington Court Hotel at 425 New Jersey Avenue.
Oh, right across from the Hyatt, right there.
Exactly, exactly.
Yep. I'm going to take a break. Renard, thank you for that. We're going to continue this conversation in just a bit, but don't forget you can hear this in every edition of the Daily Drum Insight segment via podcast on WHUR.com. Please stay with us. The Daily Drum will continue on Sirius XM Channel 141. The Original Quiet Storm with John Mons is next. That's on WHUR. We continue this Election Day conversation on Sirius XM Channel 141 in just a few seconds. Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM Channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We continue our conversation about Maryland's primary day election. My guests are Dr. Sharice Nelson, political analyst, William Ford, reporter with Maryland Matters, and Republican analyst Raynard Jackson. So before the break, William, we were talking about David Trone, first of all, financing his own campaign. I don't believe I'm about to say this. Let's move the politics out of that issue for just a moment. If you got it to spend, who cares, William?
Well, yeah, but some people do.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the politics comes into play. And also with politics, the one difference that, as the conversation was going on, I just thought of. One major difference are the support factor.
What do you mean?
The county executive, in terms of her support factor, has the majority of the Maryland congressional delegation. She has the Maryland's presiding officers and many of the major elected officials on her side, which is building a grassroots campaign. Now, don't say David Trone doesn't have any support, because he does. And having Hakeem Jeffries on your side is no slouch, even though he's not a Marylander, even though he doesn't live in the state. But he speaks volumes because he's the minority leader. And there's been one particular ethnic group he has capitalized on, and that's Latinos. And there has been a dissatisfaction with some Latino leaders in Prince George's County. And it'll take too long to talk about, but the quick summation is that some of the Latino leaders have not been pleased with the Alston-Brooks administration not appointing members from the Latino community to her cabinet and to schools and any school positions. When you have about 40% of the school population Latino students, and there's not many of those of Latino descent, that brings a little bit of a problem. And they have not been silent on that. And David Trone's capitalized on it.
You know, Sharice, Renard made a comment about the quote unquote good old boys out there in Western Maryland and the fact that Angela Alston-Brooks is a woman, a Black woman. But the reality is, and share with me your thoughts about that. Yes, he is correct. Angela Alston-Brooks is a Black woman. The entire Maryland congressional delegation is all men. There's only been one woman senator elected from the state of Maryland, and that was Barbara Mikulski. Some could argue, Sharice, that for no other reason other than the fact that Angela Alston-Brooks is a woman, that it is time for another woman senator from the state of Maryland. Do you think that kind of argument will hold water with the primary electorate and even the general electorate.
I think that trying to figure out what voters want at this stage of politicization is foolhardy. And what I mean by that is today it may be because she's a black woman, tomorrow it's because she's a black woman, right? And I think one of your guests has already denoted to that, right? As a black woman, black women tend to be far more inclusive, and they're looking to the collective, to the larger collective, to bring as many people inside of the tent as possible, right? So the idea that she hasn't brought as many Latinos into the tent, right, then speaks directly towards her being a black woman and her being a black woman, right? So I think this idea of being a black woman then sets a bar higher oftentimes for black women that are politicians, in regardless of party, because of the inherent nature of what we believe black women to be: nurturers, people that are about the collective, teachers, people that are they are normally characterized, even in politics, as this nurturing figure. So that is why not reaching out to a set of voters is seen as far more detrimental to her than it is to Trone. So what I would say is that we really don't know where voters are leaning. You just said to us that one person voted and didn't even remember who they voted for. So I think if we're trying to frame this in a traditional sense of black woman, historical lens, right, using those as indicators, I think that's where we get in trouble. But what I do think is, to one of your guests' point about the grassroots influence, the fact that she has, for all intents and purposes, the establishment in this Maryland, in the Maryland delegation that is all men, that's far more grassroots, right? Whereas Trone is then tapping on, in many ways, the establishment of the party. I think that is going to be more of an indicator for her. As far as these white men in Western Maryland, they've been the white men in Western Maryland, and they're going to stay the white men in Western Maryland. Trying to then figure out or trying to put your finger on them, I think is also dangerous. If Donald Trump has taught us anything, what he has taught us is continuously feed red meat to your base and then work on getting your base out then to the election, because that's what wins.
Let's talk about the gaffes, the Trone gaffes. I would argue that the gaffes regarding public displays of a temper may be more challenging for him than the racial slip of the tongue earlier. What do you say to that, Reynard? Does someone who has been seen as having a very muscular temper, when triggered by a reporter or anything for that matter, might that be problematic, or do you think that may, in this complicated electorate, something positive?
Well, I think in that sense, Trump is a lot like Trump, strictly in the sense that I think voters connect and are looking for that alpha male type personality and someone that shows a sign of strength and resolve. And I think with Trump, that plays to his advantage in a state like Maryland. And you have, let's face it, again, people may not like to talk about this in polite company. As a male, when you look at what Hollywood is putting out there for public consumption, they have so emasculated and effeminized the male, especially black male. I think in Trump's case, obviously he's a white guy, but I think he may resonate with a lot of brothers strictly because he comes across as a strong alpha male. Now, I don't know how that plays with the female part of that equation, but I think with the male demographic, that's a strength.
Sharice, is he right? I'm looking at the look on your face.
Yeah, you see my reaction, right? I think it's very let's just talk about temperament, period,
Yeah.
right? And the reason I say let's talk about temperament, period, is because had also Brooks even tried to pretend she was going to get to the mic and done some of the things Trone has done, her campaign would have been over as soon as the interview was. Okay, so when we're talking about this, I think what we really have to ask ourselves is, why are we asking something different from male elected leaders than we're asking from female elected leaders? That to me is really the question, right? Because if fitness of office means that you have the ability to keep temperament and make good decisions, then it's very clear who the winner is in regards to these two candidates.
William?
Interesting little nuggets here, but tell you, there's some folks who look at what Trone did as very passionate. He cares. He's strong. He's not afraid. But there's some folks like, if this man kirks out too much longer, he's going to hurt somebody. Or he's going to make a wrong decision, and then all kapoo goes loose. So there you go.
Is that a technical term? Kapoo?
Yeah, it's a technical term.
Yeah, I'm going to have to add that to my
telling me a bunch of little
political vocabulary.
It comes out. Instead of saying something off the cuff and not right, keep it a family show.
I get it.
But there was, going back to the debate that was in Baltimore, I went and noted in the story I wrote that Trone did come off as passionate, not only on stage, but during an interview with a few of us afterward. Also Brooks, very calm, relaxed demeanor, same way she was off camera. Only reason I noted that, because it's like, this is kind of obvious. Trone is on constantly. And some folks say that's good. And it all depends on who you talk to. And you look at the county executive, well, they look at her as a woman with a teenage daughter who knows how she has to keep her cool. Now, somebody say, well, Trone's a father. He has a wife. But it has shown he's the alpha male. So it's all going to depend on how that temperament is going to come through.
But what have alpha males gotten us, Harold? Right? What has alpha males gotten us from the political landscape broader than the state of Maryland? Right? What has it really gotten us? It has gotten us into a spot where we are now debating, right, the temperament of the person versus the actual issues. We are now debating, right? This alpha male, and some may call it toxic masculinity. I'm not getting into all of that, but what I will say is that we keep saying that the alpha male is our solution, and then we look across the historical politic, and where have alpha males historically actually helped us? Right. And I don't know also Brooke personally, so I can't say that her demeanor is one that's contrived. But I will say, as a Black woman who calls myself passionate and has been labeled as angry, that we have to practice sounding the same on stage, off stage, behind the stage, and underneath the stage.
Well, let me say, and I don't know if William or Renard can speak to this, but having watched her through several campaigns, knowing her, that yes, she is an even-tempered person. Okay, and just to give you a little more perspective, when I saw her daughter in some of these political campaigns, I was like, oh my God, look how she's grown, because the very first time that I saw her daughter at an event that I was master of ceremonies, her daughter was a little girl. Okay. With the same kind of for those of us who are parents and who have ever had young children, Angela Alsobrooks was giving that, come here, come here, come here, come here, come here, come here. That's how little she was. But now her daughter is a young woman. And so I've known her long enough to say that the person that we saw during the debate, the person that we see in these political ads, the person that we see and I have seen in these press conferences over the years, that is indeed who she is. Very, very much an even-tempered person, although I have seen her angry. I've seen her angry at press conferences as it relates to violence. I've seen her angry with reporters, including yours truly, for us asking penetrating questions. But generally speaking, yes, she is who we have seen her to be during this particular campaign. I will say this. I want to talk about a broader political issue regarding Angela Alsobrooks before we talk about Larry Hogan. Governor Wes Moore is probably the highest profile endorsement that she has received. And what do you believe, William, this portends for him if she wins the primary and indeed beats Larry Hogan? Does that solidify him as a young kingmaker?
Well, that's with those two dynamics. I will go back and say that the county executive helped him. Quite frankly,
because she did endorse him very early in his
when
race for governor.
She endorsed him, boom, that brought him to the top. This is pretty much because everyone knew that Governor Moore was going to support the county executive. It was just waiting of when.
Yeah.
That's literally it. That was happening. And now that it has happened, boom, just a stamp of approval automatically. No, the county executive, no, I don't like to repeat myself, but this bears repeating. County Executive Angela Alsobrooks helped Governor Wes Moore get that nomination and get elected for the simple fact folks were wondering if she was going to choose someone who she preceded in WHUR Baker as county executive, and she didn't. There were some few surprises, including WHUR Baker. He was hurt a little bit. When you put out a statement the way he did afterward, that usually does not happen. He wasn't angry, didn't call name. He didn't do none of that, but he felt a little hurt because he thought he had her in the bank. Once county executive endorsed him, boom, up to the top.
So I want to talk about beyond the primary, because that Emerson College poll that we spoke about earlier, it really is the latest poll. Some would say that, and Angela Alsobrooks would also say this, for example, that she is polling 42% to Trone's 41%. But the reality is, when you look at the plus or minuses, they are neck and neck. But the one thing that this poll goes on to say is that either of them, Raynard, would beat Larry Hogan. Larry Hogan was a very popular governor amongst independents, among some centrist Democrats in Maryland. But things have changed. Do you really think that Larry Hogan could beat either of them, considering the current political climate, Raynard, regarding what's happening on Capitol Hill right now?
Well, Hogan presents an interesting dilemma for Democrats, and I have a lot of friends involved in Democratic politics there in Maryland. The default position by Democrats, this being a presidential year, is to associate Hogan with Donald Trump. Well, that doesn't work because Hogan has made it perfectly clear that he's not aligned with any part of Trump and the MAGA movement. So that will be a frivolous waste of money if the Democrat, and that they're considering that right now. That's part of their strategy. Hogan is a likable person. He fits the state's demographic as a Republican. He would be considered basically a liberal Republican in the mold of Rockefeller up in New York in the 60s and a Mitt Romney in Massachusetts. Now, there are few other states Hogan can go to as a Republican with his value system and fit in. He is perfect for Maryland.
Well, yeah,
Perfect.
he's definitely not a ruby red Republican as we see in the South, but because he is not aligned with Donald Trump, and when I say not aligned with Donald Trump, I'm being polite. He is not a fan of
Right.
the previous president. Might that affect those who might otherwise vote for Republicans and instead of voting for Larry Hogan, not vote at all? Republicans not vote at all for the U.S. Senate race. They may just throw their hands up and just stick with their congressional districts.
Here's my prediction on the Hogan factor in a presidential general election come November. If Donald Trump makes Maryland competitive, meaning he's only going to lose by 15 or 20 points versus 30 or 40 points, then Hogan becomes competitive. But on the presidential level, if Biden is just blowing Trump out of the water, it's almost impossible for Hogan to win. Competitive, I think Hogan wins. If Trump gets blown out the water, it's almost impossible to win with those tailwinds going in favor of the Democrats.
What do you think, Sharice?
I love that Raynard is still using very traditional political metrics or political thought process in a political era that has bedamned all of those metrics, and so I appreciate him sticking to the normal political norms and the indicators. But if the pandemic and what has happened since has taught us anything, that we have to be comfortable with not knowing, right? We have to be comfortable that in a polling situation where you have where basically the 42 to the 41% is essentially a toss up, right? It's neck and neck, it's toss up. Then we just have to be ready to assume whatever the voters decide. When it comes to Hogan, people are not going to forget, especially Black people are not going to forget that Hogan did not want to give up this money to these HBCUs. They are not going to forget that. And I feel that if Also Brooks gets the nomination, that is going to be a part of her strategy. It is not going to be a part of her strategy to tie him to Trump because he's been a vocal candidate that's against him. But it is going to be about tying him to the belief systems that people that vote for Trump have, right? And one of those biggest things is this money with the HBCUs. Larry Hogan drug his feet after when it was time to pay that money out. And I don't think that when we talk about when we're talking about, let me not say PG so that won't be offended. When we're talking about Prince George's County and we're talking about Baltimore, we are talking about Black people that are well educated, and many of them, if not a good 30% of them, have attended historically Black colleges and universities. I don't believe that Black people are going to be that short-sighted. One of the biggest reasons that she was able to get Westmore's endorsement, which in many ways played a role in Hakeem Jeffries, right, then going for Trone, is because of the fact that she is seen as one of their own. She is seen as sewn into the fabric of Maryland, and being sewn into the fabric of Maryland and speaking towards what I believe Marylanders want and need as a blue state. She is the person to do that. We have to stop looking at Larry Hogan as the standard bearer for the state of Maryland and continue to see him as the outlier governor that he was.
Yeah, well, and obviously the previous Republican governor, Robert Ehrlich, was similar to Larry Hogan. Some could argue that he was, I don't know, I can't even say that someone could argue that he was a little more left of Larry Hogan. I think maybe they were cut from the same cloth, but maybe one was satin and the other was silk, but it's still, the same kind of material. I did want to, in these last few minutes or so, and I'll start with you, William. What is going on with turnout? We don't have official numbers, but the reporting has been that turnout has been abysmal during this primary. This morning in Baltimore, it was a trickle. It was a trickle for early voting, and of course, we don't know about the mail-in ballots, and we just don't know. But based on the reporting, what is going on?
I was getting ready to say that's the conundrum we have. There could be lots of thousands of people, young, middle-aged, or experienced citizens who say, you know what, don't feel like waiting in lines no more. I can easily fill out my ballot at home, put it in the slot, and just go right home. They maybe drop it off at work, drop it off when they're doing an errand. So it's made it a little easier. Now, when I was out today, I was at Henry Wise High School in Upper Marlboro, about 5 people within 10 minutes who came in to vote. My colleague, Brian Sears, he was out, I think it was Anne Arundel County, may have been 4 people in about an hour. It's incredible. And we're not sure if more Marylanders put in the mail-in ballots, but I talked to political science professor Todd Eberle from St. Mary's College, who analyzes a lot of Maryland politics. He's seeing turnout from what he's analyzed, at least at this point, it's a little low. And there's some competitive races going on besides Senate. You have Baltimore with the mayor and the council. You have Cecil County, a new executive. You have the 3rd and 6th congressional districts. I mean, Harry Dunn is and Senator Sarah Elfreth. That's some major races. So, yeah,
that is fascinating to me. This morning, there were 3 people in line at my polling place in Baltimore. It opened 10 minutes late. Okay, I was in that area for about an hour or so, just kind of making some observations. But it really continued to be a trickle. Renard, what do you think is at the foundation of why the turnout, based on the reporting, is so low right now?
Oh, that's an easy question. You see that both locally in Maryland, but you see this nationwide. The American people, the voter, regardless of your political affiliation, feels alienated. No one is speaking to their concerns and their needs and their issues. Everyone is, and here in DC, in the U.S. Congress, we have this term called the uniparty. Right now, you have a Republican majority in the House, and yet a de facto Democrat speaker, Hakeem Jeffries. Biden is getting everything he wants out of a Republican-controlled House and a Democrat-controlled Senate. That's a uniparty, but no one is speaking. Again, this beyond your political label. Inflation is off the radar screen right now. Average voters going in can't buy a gallon of milk. They have to buy a quarter, and hopefully it will last to the next week, and then buy another quarter because they can't afford to buy a gallon. And a lot of folks feel so disconnected to their elected leadership. And one of the things I would pose to you and William and Sharice is it more important to have a person who addresses your concerns, or is it more important to have a Black representative from your community? I say what Black folks are concluding after Johnson in Chicago, Adams in New York, Jones in St. Louis as mayor, it is more important to have, it's better to have a white person who addresses your concerns than having a brother or sister who ignores your concerns.
William, real quick, and then Sharice, because I only have about 45 seconds left.
I'll be very quick. I'll let the doctor respond to that particular part. But he mentioned about economic issues. That's something that Larry Hogan has been very strong on as a businessman. His father, who is from Prince George's County, taught him that. So that's something he's going to lean into heavy. Because there was somebody I talked to talking about eggs. I can't buy eggs. It's ridiculous. So
Yeah.
Larry Hogan's going to jump on that hard. Thank you,
Okay.
Doc.
Sharice, I'll let you have the last word real quick.
Well, I thank you so much for having me as always.
Always.
Apathy, right? Political apathy is rampant, as Raynard has said. But this is to me what I think is really the question. It's not about if the Black person in the seat can get in the seat. It's about what the Black person is going to do in the seat. And what we know oftentimes is that if a Black person that is far more boisterous that's in that seat, they are less likely to be able to get things done because of their personality. So I go back to my very point at the very beginning of this show. Personality is going to drive this primary, and I believe it's going to drive the Senate race. I'm all in for Also Brooks, and I believe that she has the personality and the grassroots leanings that will then be the best for the state of Maryland.
I'm going to have to let that be the last word. Thank you all for sharing in this conversation, Raynard. Good luck at your event next week. That is the Daily Drum for this Tuesday, May 14th, Election Day. I'm Harold Fisher.